Okay, so here's the thing everybody seems to be missing. Trump thinks he's squeezing China by targeting Beijing, but while all that noise is happening, China is quietly sneaking in Russian oil through northern shipping routes. And right at this very moment, China is using satellites to watch how the US military moves and feeding all that data straight into its AI systems. Trump is basically handing China a free front row seat to every secret US military move, like giving away a hit show for absolutely nothing. Let's actually zoom out and look at the full picture. Why is this basically a dream come true for Beijing? We're going to walk through the 5 biggest lessons China has already picked up from this war, why America's way of fighting wars is basically outdated now, and how this whole Middle East mess is about to make prices explode everywhere. Right now, around 984 tanker ships are stuck at the Strait of Hormuz. That's roughly 22% of every tanker on the entire planet. And here's the scary part. Shipping deals are locked in 3 to 6 months ahead of time, so the worst of the damage hasn't even shown up yet. Now step back even further. What exactly is going on here? More than a decade has gone into watching conflicts, energy markets, and the slow, sneaky chess moves that big, powerful countries play with each other's money. And honestly, what's happening right now doesn't look like a plan at all. It looks like someone just winging it and calling it a strategy. It's the same bad idea, just louder. Think about it. Iran was literally the most punished country in the world for decades. Now the most powerful military on earth is fighting it with bombs. And Iran still hasn't fallen. Nobody new is running the country. Iran has pushed prices up around the entire globe. Iran is basically frozen in place. Was that really the goal? Here's where it gets even messier. The Pentagon already knew this was coming. For 30 whole years, through Bush, Obama, and Biden, the top military brass kept pushing back hard against Israel's attempts to drag America into a fight with Iran. In 2024 alone, Israel tried twice to pull Biden into a direct military confrontation, once in April, again in October. Both times Biden said no. General Caney, the top military official in the country right now, reportedly warned President Trump before February 28th that America simply did not have a solid military plan that could actually work. Trump didn't listen. Netanyahu told Trump exactly what he wanted to hear. The regime is fragile. One big hit and the whole thing collapses, just like Venezuela. And Trump, not exactly surrounded by the sharpest thinkers, took the bait completely. China is not scared one bit. There's a story going around in Washington think tanks and across social media ever since the first bombs hit. It sounds like this: America cuts off Venezuela's oil going to China, hit number 1. Then America takes out Iran, hit number 2. China's economy breaks down, America wins, done. It's a clean little story. You could fit it on a bumper sticker, but it is dangerously, disastrously wrong. Let's look at the actual numbers, because numbers don't play favorites. China has already figured out how to produce 84% of its own energy needs. That means only 16% comes from outside its borders. And that number has been going up for 20 years straight. Not by luck, totally on purpose. China poured massive money into solar panels, wind power, hydroelectric dams, nuclear energy, and it now has the biggest fleet of electric vehicles anywhere on Earth. China's electricity production makes America's look tiny, and America's power grid has barely changed in 30 years. This was a 20-year master plan that started back in 2000, and now China's renewable energy production matches all its coal output combined. Within that remaining 16% of imported energy, oil makes up about 59%. Of all the oil China brings in, around 17% comes from Iran, between 1.38 and 1.61 million barrels per day through 2024 and 2025. Run those numbers and you land on something that should keep every person who designed this war up at night. China only needs Iranian energy for about 1.5% of everything it consumes, just 1.5%. That's the number a whole war was started over. But here's what the strategists in Washington refuse to admit. China doesn't only bring in oil through normal channels. Beijing has secretly built its own fleet of tankers, about 18% of all tanker space on the entire planet, operating completely outside normal rules. These ships switch their flags mid-ocean, change their names, turn off tracking devices, and secretly move oil between ships in hidden waters near Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, disguising Iranian oil as Malaysian or Omani before it slips quietly into Chinese records. Since 2022, Chinese customs officially reported zero direct oil from Iran, but independent firms tracking tanker movements confirm over 1.38 million barrels per day are still arriving. Current estimates suggest up to 300 million barrels are sitting on hidden tankers right now, a secret floating fuel reserve. Add onshore reserves worth 100 to 115 days of imports, and Beijing has built a cushion that can absorb months of trouble without blinking. Now here's where things go from just wrong to completely self-destructive. Look at who actually needs the Strait of Hormuz the most. Japan gets 91% of its oil through that one waterway. The Philippines gets 94%. Every day, 20 million barrels flow through Hormuz, and 80% of it heads to Asian markets. China also gets 31% of its liquefied natural gas from the Middle East. So yes, China has some real exposure, but compared to Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, America's own allies, China's risk is totally manageable. Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago said it plainly: Japan and South Korea are going to get hit hardest. They rely on Gulf oil way more than China does. And the Europeans, already struggling without Russian energy, will be in even deeper trouble once Middle East supply gets cut off on top of that. America set out to use Hormuz as a weapon against China. What it actually did was accidentally hurt every ally it needs for its Pacific strategy. Daily tanker rates for Middle Eastern crude to China have shot past $400,000. Brent crude has blasted past $92 a barrel with projections of $150 or higher. And Venezuela, that first punch everyone was cheering, Venezuelan oil is still being sold to China, according to the South China Morning Post. The only thing that changed is America is now doing the selling through offshore accounts. The people collecting profits switched. The oil kept flowing. Meanwhile, China is speeding up the Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline deal with Russia, using Moscow as a backup for Middle East shortfalls. This crisis is doing the one thing Washington feared most, building a secure land-based energy partnership between China and Russia, right at the expense of the Gulf region America just destabilized. The blockade strategy isn't failing. It already failed. Now let's talk about the war itself. Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th with nearly 900 airstrikes in just the first 12 hours, B-52 bombers, stealth fighters, and massive naval power. The first 24 to 36 hours cost an estimated $5.2 billion, and a big chunk of that was spent blowing up fake targets. Let that sink in. Precision-guided missiles, each costing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, fired at targets that turned out to be elaborate decoys. The Iranians had moved everything, spread it out, hidden it, and planted dummies all over the country. America fired first, checked later, and found out it had punched empty air. Analysts are quietly calling it the Battle of Decoys. The strikes aimed at Iran's leadership did partly work. The supreme leader was killed. But here's the critical thing the architects of this war completely failed to understand. There is not a single example in modern warfare where bombing from the air alone caused a government to collapse. Not in Korea, where the North was bombed to rubble and didn't quit. Not in Vietnam, where bombing went on for years and America still lost. Not even in Japan, where Tokyo was firebombed in a single night in March 1945, killing more people than either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And Japan still didn't surrender until August. Most historians say it was actually the Soviet ground invasion of Manchuria that ended it, not the atomic bombs. If you want regime change in Iran, you need boots on the ground. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq with 93 million people. Even Trump is smart enough to know that's a disaster. So America is stuck with air power. The exact tool history says never achieves what we need it to achieve. Meanwhile, Iran is fighting smart. A friend in the defense industry described an Iranian drone, sheet metal, dirt cheap but effective. These things cost thousands of dollars, and America is firing multi-million-dollar missiles to shoot them down. That is the brutal exchange rate of this war. Iran still has at least 45,000 missiles and possibly 50,000 to 100,000 drones. America started with roughly 8,000 to 9,000 high-end weapons and has probably burned through at least half. Restocking takes months. Patriot missiles aren't like bullets. You can't surge production overnight. Even General Caney, Trump's own personally chosen top military commander, reportedly made it clear before the war that this was not a viable option. Every time he appears on camera, observers say he doesn't look happy. He saw what was coming and was overruled. Iran has now destroyed over 27 U.S. bases across the Gulf, taken out virtually all long-range early warning radars in Israel and the Arabian Peninsula, and is systematically dismantling American military infrastructure using China's Beidou satellite navigation system, which kept working perfectly, even after America jammed GPS across the entire region. The U.S. Navy, with 2 full carrier strike groups deployed, still can't protect commercial ships through Hormuz. In the 1980s, America ran a similar operation with a 600-ship navy. Today, 8 Arleigh Burke destroyers and 3 littoral combat ships. That's it. And here's the feedback loop nobody wants to talk about. The rare earth minerals, gallium, semiconductors, and precision parts needed to build replacement missile systems. China controls all those supply chains. The country America is trying to weaken controls the materials needed to rebuild the weapons being used to weaken it. China's 2026 military budget rose 7% specifically to exploit this. Every missile fired over the Persian Gulf is one fewer available for a Taiwan contingency, and the depletion only gets worse over time. While America burns through munitions and credibility, China is sitting in the world's most valuable classroom. The People's Liberation Army publicly posted 5 lessons drawn from the Iran war. That wasn't an accident. It was a message to Washington, to the region, and to Taiwan. Lesson 1: watch out for the enemy already inside your house. Iran's leadership was eliminated through deep human intelligence, Israeli agents embedded inside the country who knew exactly where everyone was. China looked at this and saw its own reflection. Espionage cases in Taiwan jumped from 16 in 2021 to 64 in 2024. Beijing is already running that same playbook, while also noting that internal paranoia from anti-corruption purges can gut military competence from the inside. Lesson 2: diplomacy is a lie. Trump was negotiating with Iran. Reports say Iran had agreed to zero uranium stockpiling and full verification just days before the bombs fell. He pulled the same move with Maduro, talks one day, special forces the next. Chinese state media ran an editorial saying Washington uses diplomacy not as a conversation between equals, but as a tool of control. When Xi meets Trump at the end of this month, that lesson will be silently sitting at the table between them. Lesson 3: superior firepower matters. Whatever the moral arguments, hard power decides outcomes. China's defense budget rose 7%. Nuclear-powered carriers, drones, electronic warfare systems, all charging toward 2027. China's analysts also concluded that Japan and the Philippines must not be allowed to become what they call the Israel of East Asia, a regional ally used as America's military staging platform. Lesson 4: the illusion of victory. You can destroy air defenses in the first hour and still completely fail to get what you wanted. Netanyahu's real goal may not be regime change at all. It may be a failed state, the way Iraq and Libya were destroyed, but even that requires sustained destruction America can't afford politically or financially. China wants Taiwan reunification, not a rebellious occupation feeding decades of global anger. Lesson 5: stand on your own 2 feet. Iran pursued self-sufficiency for decades, and it still wasn't enough. But China is not Iran. It has the industrial base, the scale, the technology, and its Beidou satellite system just proved itself in live combat. That's validation under real battlefield conditions. And the lesson the PLA didn't publish, Operation Epic Fury, is a live stress test for Taiwan. Every strike gives Beijing real data on American stealth performance, munition depletion rates, and political resolve. The Shadow Fleet, CIPS, M-Bridge, all just proven functional under a full military and economic embargo. Beijing has validated the exact systems it would need to sustain China's economy during a Taiwan blockade. Now we get to the part that should genuinely terrify you. The most dangerous weapon in this war isn't a missile or a drone, it's a financial instrument most people have never heard of. The global derivatives market holds a notional value between $600 trillion and $1 quadrillion, roughly 10 times the entire world's economy. Backing all of that, approximately $300 billion in actual real money. For every real dollar in the system, there are $2,000 to $3,000 in bets riding on top of it, a huge share tied to energy prices. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange is reporting record-breaking volumes in energy contracts. People aren't trading. They're panicking, scrambling to cover positions designed for $80 oil, not $150 or $200. The question nobody at the Fed or the ECB is asking loud enough: what happens when the counterparties can't pay? Iran knows exactly what happens. It's been outside the SWIFT banking system for decades, building offshore companies in Dubai, navigating shadow financial networks, and placing bets on the very chaos it's creating. When Iran hits tankers in Hormuz, it's not just disrupting shipping, it's moving energy prices. When it strikes fuel storage at Salalah, it triggers insurance recalculations and repricing across every commodity market on Earth. When it targets Amazon data centers, and yes, that is happening, it hits the digital infrastructure underpinning Western financial clearing. Iran's military command has now announced the end of reciprocal strikes. From now on, continuous operations. Get ready for $200 oil. Qatar is warning of $150 oil and invoking force majeure to halt production. The UAE just shut down the world's largest refinery, not from bombing, but because there's nowhere to put the output. 25% of the world's oil is offline. 35% of global fertilizer supply is disrupted. If oil breaks past $150, knockout clauses in derivatives contracts start firing. Banks discover they can't cover their exposure, and the whole thing cascades, like an insurance company going bankrupt when everyone crashes at once. Except the insurance company is the Western financial system. Gas at $8 to $10 a gallon. Electricity surging. Food prices at levels that topple governments, not in developing countries, but right here. Mearsheimer described it plainly. You could be looking at a worldwide depression, or at minimum a global recession with massive consequences. And while everyone was watching missiles, China was quietly building a parallel financial architecture to survive exactly this. CPS is processing 928 billion renminbi daily, roughly $128 billion, a fully working alternative to SWIFT. Project M-Bridge, involving China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, surged past $55 billion in transaction volume by early 2026. Digital yuan transactions between Iranian entities and Chinese buyers are virtually impossible for the U.S. Treasury to intercept or even monitor. The Zhuhai conduit channeled an estimated $844 billion in 2024 alone. Iranian crude goes to Chinese buyers. Money goes to Zhuhai. Zhuhai pays Chinese firms to build airports and railways inside Iran. Not a single dollar crosses a border. Western surveillance sees nothing. A separate barter network moves $6.1 billion in Iranian industrial metals, including $1.66 billion in copper and $900 million in aluminum, directly to Chinese industrial centers in exchange for vehicles from Chery, Dongfeng, and Jias, all without traditional banking letters of credit. China promised Iran $400 billion over 25 years. The actual money delivered? Minimal, deliberately. A weakened, sanction-strangled Iran is a compliant partner. By keeping Iran on a lifeline, China guarantees permanent dependency. 90% of Iran's crude exports go to one buyer. That's not a partnership. That's a monopoly in diplomatic clothing. One final layer deserves attention. The Gulf states were never consulted before February 28th. They had no seat at the table, and they're paying a brutal price. Ports under attack, oil infrastructure targeted, desalination plants at risk. The bases meant to protect them turned them into missile magnets. The interceptors meant to shield them are reportedly being sent to Israel instead. Before the war, Gulf states were already hedging. Saudi Arabia formed a strategic partnership with Pakistan, which explicitly offered nuclear protection. Turkey is trying to join that arrangement because the Turks are worried about America too. Israel attacked Qatar within the past year, and America didn't protect Qatar. That tells you everything about what the American security umbrella is actually worth. China spotted this opening years ago. In March 2023, Beijing brokered a historic deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, restoring diplomatic relations after a 7-year freeze, achieving what America couldn't. Chinese exports to the Middle East grew twice as fast as the rest of the world in 2025. Chinese direct investment in the region from 2019 to 2024 approached $89 billion. The post-American Gulf era isn't a prediction. It's already underway. And Operation Epic Fury just accelerated it by a decade. So where does this leave us? America is fighting a 21st century conflict with 20th century assumptions. Air power alone has never produced regime change. Iran's population is rallying together under bombardment, just like populations always have, from Korea to Vietnam to the London Blitz. Blocking Hormuz strengthened China and devastated America's own allies. And the financial shock hasn't even fully arrived yet. Iran is not looking for an exit ramp. They have leverage, and they know it. They want sanctions lifted, probably reparations, and a real guarantee there won't be a third war in 6 months. Meanwhile, China has validated its sanctions evasion architecture under real combat conditions, collected live intelligence on American capabilities and political fracture points, and accelerated the construction of a post-dollar financial system that makes traditional economic pressure increasingly useless. Colonel Douglas MacGregor called it the last act in the American show in the Middle East. When this ends, America will simply be finished there, and everybody will want it out. Mearsheimer went further, calling America a crusader state, addicted to war, breaking its own constitution. If you live by the sword, you turn into a modern Sparta, and history doesn't give Sparta a happy ending. The old school is playing by old stories: Venezuela, Iraq, regime change from the air. The new school is running a completely different game: energy independence, industrial self-reliance, parallel financial systems, strategic patience, and the cold calculation that your opponent will exhaust himself if you simply wait. We are not watching a war. We are watching a rewriting of the rules of global power. And the cost of that rewrite won't be paid by generals or strategists. It will be paid by the sailor on a burning tanker in Hormuz, by the family paying $10 a gallon, by the retiree whose pension is one oil spike away from collapse, by the young person who can't afford groceries because fertilizer costs tripled. So here's one real question. Are you actually ready for $10 gas and a global banking meltdown for the sake of ambitions in the desert? Think hard about that. And if this gave you something the evening news didn't, subscribe, because the scenarios tracked here are the ones that won't show up on television until it's already too late to prepare. If you want to support the work further, you can become a channel member.